there's some reviews in here which might make some people unhappy. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I'm going to wrap up my end of April reading. Probably the last 2 weeks of April. These are the 4 books that I read. I want to talk about and review those, and then I'm going to do my May pile of possibilities, which is really short at this point because May is one of those months where I'm just going to read whatever I want to. I'm not going to try to, choose books that match a theme. When I do that, they're always books that I wanted to read anyway, and I kind of make them fit the theme. But in this case, I'm not going to worry about any reading events that take place this month and just kind of read what I want. So I wanted to start off with the wrap-up, and I read 4 books here at the end of the month. The first one was Any Other City by Hazel Jane Plant. This is the second book that I read for Trans Girl April this month. This book is really, I think, inventively set up, in which we see Hazel Jane Plant acting as the ghostwriter, more or less, for a famous, I'm going to call her a rock and roll musician who has transitioned fully, and therefore is a trans woman who's represented in this book. The really creative thing I think about this is that really, for the most part, the book is divided into 2 parts, separated by 20 years. The first is a part in which we see our main character who is living their life physically as a man and has not transitioned, has not accepted really fully the fact that they are a trans woman, and they're interested in music and art and trying to go to art school, and they kind of get taken in by a group of trans women who I think open up this person's mind to possibilities and really what they're about, and kind of helps this person find who they truly are. And that there's a lot of really kind of, I think, charming descriptions of friendship. There's a quirky artist who acts as kind of a mentor for our main character. And then our character goes back to Los Angeles during this time period in which he's, by the way, the big part of both stories is set in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. She goes back to Los Angeles, where she had been involved as a man in a relationship with a woman, and that ends. And then in the interim between the part of the story that was 20 years ago and more or less modern day, they do transition fully. And then we see them 20 years later back in Amsterdam again, famous rock musician, and kind of connecting in different ways and exploring different aspects of being in trans relationships, having come off kind of a nightmare trans relationship. I found the way that which the book was structured to be really, really inventive. Not unprecedented, not unheard of, but I thought it was a really kind of unique approach to have our main character be a friend of our actual author, and our actual author be the person kind of telling this story. I thought that added some charm to it, and I thought there was some really beautiful writing about emotion, about trauma, about feeling awkward, feeling out of place, about friendship, about living in a city which would be foreign to you, about experiencing all aspects of the new life that you've chosen, or the new life that you've begun. Chosen is the wrong word. And kind of embracing that in all its aspects. And I thought that was really good. I will say, and this is the first time I think I've said this about a book in a long time, I did find that some of the intense descriptions of sexual activity at some point just became kind of mind-numbing and tedious. It wasn't that I was morally outraged. It wasn't that what was taking place was disgusting, even though some of it sounds uncomfortable to me. It was just too much of it. There was literally one whole long chapter in which, to me, it read like one sex act after another. And while I understand and it fits within the story and what the author's trying to do, I thought really well. I just thought at some point it might have been okay if we just moved on, if we didn't have that. That's just a me taste thing. Maybe your mind will vary, but if you're going to read this book, do be aware of that. It is not a closed door kind of situation when it comes to sex. Sex is oftentimes fully described, and it can, to me, it wasn't uncomfortable so much as it was just it was just tedious. It was enough, and I found myself kind of skimming through those sections because I get what's happening. I understand why it matters. I just thought it was a little bit much, but other than that, I thought the book was good. I don't think this is this is not for me a great book, but I did think it was really interesting and fun. And one of the things I think that occurred to me when reading Any Other City is that there is an element of humor. There's an element of embracing life in the work by trans women, in the fictional work by trans women that I've read. Even though I'm not talking about hiding the trauma, I'm not talking about pretending that everything is okay. I'm not talking about ignoring danger that exists, any of those things. But there is a certain, I think, kind of embrace of life and the humor and the ridiculousness of people's attitudes, and I just kind of find that to be kind of refreshing, and that was true for Any Other City as well. So that's the first book I wanted to review. The second book I wanted to review, I think this is the 7th book that I read that was a part of the Women's Prize long list, and I believe this book also made the Women's Prize short list, and that is Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan. I'm going to mess the last name up. By V.V. Ganeshananthan. So that's my shot at the last name. This is a book that I know that a lot of people like a lot. There are a lot of people who've read for the Women's Prize who want this one to win. And I'll just tell you up front, this was not my favorite book on the Women's Prize that I've read. And I'll kind of explain to you why. So before I get into why it wasn't my favorite, let me just say that the writing is excellent at times, quite beautiful. The novel creates the place in which it takes place, which is kind of the northern part of Sri Lanka during the time period in which there was civil war taking place in Sri Lanka, and it goes into depth about the Tamil Tigers and their war against the government of Sri Lanka, and all the kind of aspects of that. And I thought it creates the world in which it takes place very vividly. It creates culture, society of the Tamil population or Tamil population of that area really well. I think it does a great job of exploring the nuances of embracing violence as a minority group, as a way of achieving equality perhaps, or a way of achieving independence, which is really resonant with events going on in the world right now. I thought the author did a great job of creating family and getting us to understand all those kinds of things. So, as I said, the book is set primarily in the 1980s, I believe, during which the Tamil Tigers were leading a Tamil revolution, if you want, or a civil war against the Sri Lankan government, which was definitely oppressing them and discriminating against them in all kinds of ways. I'm not sure, I guess I would call that a separatist movement. Our main character, Sashi, I believe, yes, I'm always bad at character names. Our main character, Sashi, is the only daughter in a family where she has 4 brothers. And so, that kind of is a part of the title. Yes, 4 brothers. As well as, living in a large home with her relatively, I'm going to say, affluent father who works for the government. And her mother, who at first appears to be, a stay-at-home mom in a typical way, which we might associate with kind of the culture of the place. And so we're introduced to this family life. We're introduced to her brothers. We're introduced to her as a student who is determined to go to medical school and be a doctor. So, that kind of restriction. There isn't a gender restriction placed on her in terms of what she wants to study or any other kinds of things. Her family embraced that. Society embraces that. And that's what we see her wanting to do. Things start to go off the rails when violence breaks out between Tamil people and the majority population of Sri Lanka, which leads to government reprisals and repression. And amidst this, she tries to continue on with her life. She falls in love, she goes to school, she makes friends, and at one point she goes with her brother to live in the capital city of Sri Lanka, which I believe is Colombo. And then kind of the tragic events of the story began to unfold, which I won't go into because those would be kind of spoilery. But I will say that what happens is our main character ends up working for the Tamil Tigers, and we see her kind of her grappling with the morality of what she's doing, because she doesn't agree with all the things the Tigers do. She doesn't agree with all the things that they support, and yet she ends up working with them in a medical capacity and appearing to be a supporter and a loyal member of that organization, so much so that she would have been on a terrorist watch list if those had existed at the time. There were certainly things like that. So, you know, all of that I thought was really good and really great. And it's a book which I wanted to like much more than I did. I found myself at times wishing that this was just a memoir, or hoping it was really a memoir of the author's experiences with her family in Sri Lanka at the time, and maybe it is, but I wish it had been written in that way. Because what I didn't like about it, and this is not even really a reflection on the book, but what I didn't like about it was that I wanted to get to the events. It was that kind of book where I felt like I was learning a lot about a history that I knew very little about or almost nothing about. And I was impatient to get to the events. I was impatient to see things unfold in this kind of historical narrative. And, you know, that's not what the author wrote. The author wrote a novel, so there are, you know, scenes of character development and friendship and, you know, things going on which are not a part of the actual events that were taking place. And I found that to be frustrating. I wanted to get on to what was happening and what was going on with the Tigers in Sri Lanka in that history, and, you know, with our main character's family. And there's a lot of time spent on other things. A lot of those other things are really important to the plot of the novel, and I'm not faulting the novel for having those things as a novel. I'm just saying I wished it wasn't a novel, I guess, and that we could have spent less time on those things which make it a good novel, and more time on the history and more time on the events. Again, you know, that's a me thing and not an author thing, but I can't say that it's one of my favorite books that's up for the Women's Prize, because it isn't. The third book on my list, at the end of the month, I listened to as an audiobook, and I listened to this really quickly. If you've seen the audiobook for Demon Copperhead, because that's the book I'm talking about, if you've seen the audiobook for Demon Copperhead, you'll know it's 27 hours long. And so one of the things I can say for it is I listened to those 27 hours in maybe 5 days, you know, which is about 5 hours a day. I was listening to it. I do listen to audiobooks at 1.5. I can't listen to anything faster than that, my old ears, but I did listen to it at 1.5. And I listened to most of it, way more than half of it, in kind of two big gushes, because I was really enamored with the book. I was really enchanted by the book. I thought the book was really, really good. And I thought the voice of Demon was perfect. I thought the creation of the world of Appalachia, in which Demon lived in western Virginia, was really good. I thought, you know, Kingsolver, this is definitely a place she knows. These are definitely people she knows. And I thought all of that was really good. And I thought the story of Demon's young life, when, let's say, he was, you know, a true child up to around the age of 13, was tragic and poignant and true to life and on the money in all kinds of ways. So if you don't know, Demon Copperhead is a story which is loosely kind of structured along the lines of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, in which we see Demon Copperhead grow up as kind of in similar circumstances, only, you know, in the late 20th century, early 21st century, the United States of America. He grows up in a similar way in which David Copperfield does, virtual orphan, all those kinds of things. And we see really early on him struggling his way through the Department of Social Services and their attempt to kind of get him to foster homes, and the nightmare of the foster homes he goes to, his attempt to find a real family, making connections, going then to another place to live, to be raised, kind of become an apprentice to the main person, to the man who he's living with. You know, and we see all these things unfolding, and I really thought it was great. I was all in. I thought the story is just really well told. I thought Kingsolver's gift for capturing the language, the asides, and the dark sense of humor were just perfect. And then Demon goes to high school, and he becomes a football star. At that point, I felt like that Kingsolver falls back on a lot of cliches about the way in which football stars are treated And the story began to become, I thought, increasingly preachy. Demon, by the way, gets involved with, throughout the novel, you'll see that Demon is using various drugs, but it's when he's in high school that Demon gets involved in OxyContin and those kind of drugs, and the impact they have on his life and the people around him and the community in which he lives is all really well portrayed, and it is really true to life. But I did feel like at times it was cliched. In addition to that, the longer you read in the book, if you've read David Copperfield, the longer you read in the book, the more you pick up on, I think, the connections between Demon Copperhead and David Copperfield, and that means that the book takes on a certain inevitability. You know, you can predict, and you know you're going to be right about what happens in Demon's love life. You know what's going to happen. You know how that's all going to resolve itself to a certain extent. You know, you can predict who these people are and what they're going to do and the problems Demon has. And that, I thought, started to weigh the book down. So it's one of those books which I think, you know, Kingsolver is really doing kind of a high wire act here to try to, you know, engage you, create an original character and story. And I think through the first half of the book she pulls it off. But around that high school football star, you know, worship, high school year stuff, I think it begins to kind of lose its way. Well, no, it doesn't lose its way, but it sticks so close to David Copperfield, or when you begin to see the connection to David Copperfield, that it becomes predictable. And once it becomes predictable, I found myself listening, just waiting for the next thing to happen, because you know, okay, well now this is going to happen. You know, and this is going to bring down this person. This is going to force Demon to do this, and then this is going to have to happen to this person so that he can end up with that. And you see what I'm saying. And so a lot of the things that were charming about the book remain, but to me, the power or the momentum of the story really slowed down. And I felt like in those moments when it was slowed down, we see Kingsolver teaching a lesson, preaching to us about the dangers and what happened, you know, with, you know, Purdue Pharmaceuticals and the way in which they intentionally helped addict millions of people to their drugs so that they can make huge profits. That's all here. Maybe if I hadn't read, I forgot the name of the book. If I hadn't read a kind of a nonfiction book about this process, Demon Copperhead wouldn't have been the same. The charm of Demon Copperhead wouldn't have worn off on me, but it did, and it became kind of predictable, and I became less and less enamored of it, and I listened to it in smaller and smaller chunks. In the end, primarily just listening to it to see how she resolved kind of the relationship that exists at the end. Anyway, so you know, not in my mind a great book, but a very good book. And the last book is a book I just listened to. I drove up to see my mom yesterday, or excuse me, drove to see my mom on Tuesday. I came back on Wednesday, and I listened to this book on the drive, and that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa and Moshfegh, which is about 7 hours, and you know, that's about the amount of time it would take me to listen to it at one point, or I could probably listen to it about 6 hours at 1.5 speed, so I did, and I really enjoyed listening to the book. I enjoyed the book, and I thought it was interesting, and I thought that Moshfegh had done a great job of creating this character. So if you don't know about My Year of Rest and Relaxation, we are dealing with a young woman whose name literally just left my head, who is, you know, in her early to mid-20s, who's essentially experienced a whole lot of horrible things in her life. I'm going to leave it at that because, spoiler-wise, but there are a whole lot of bad things in her life which are just kind of built up to this idea that all she really wants to do is sleep, that she literally wants to sleep her life away, that's when she's happiest, is when she's asleep. And so she sets about to try to sleep away 1 year of her life, her year of rest and relaxation. For various reasons, which I also won't talk about here, money isn't really an issue for her. And so, you know, it's possible for her to do this. But this is going to require her to get her hands on a lot of pharmaceuticals, and she does. And she finds a psychologist who will prescribe her pretty much anything, including some incredibly serious drugs, which do have this ability to knock her out. Now, the thing I think about my Year of Rest and Relaxation that kind of is one of those dividing points about that book is how you feel about that main character. So I think there are two ways of looking at her. That this is, and the first way is the way that I saw this character. That she is she has experienced trauma that she's not worked through, and therefore her incredible selfishness, and it's there, her incredible cavalier attitude about her own life are explained by the trauma she's gone through. And we never get a full description of the trauma, but you get a good idea of what this person's had to deal with as a child and as a young woman. And so I had sympathy for her situation. I don't understand her solution, which I won't give away at the end because that would be a spoiler. I don't understand her solution, but I did have sympathy for her situation, her desire to be able to stop her mind from thinking about the things that were keeping her awake, about the things that were torturing her to a certain extent, even though we don't get those represented absolutely clearly, and they kind of show up as we go through the book. The other way of looking at her, she's just a spoiled, incredibly selfish young woman who has money and looks and an excellent education, who decides to squander all that and throw it away and essentially, put her life at risk trying to pursue this unconsciousness, which she has. And, there's no doubt she makes terrible decisions. There's no doubt that she is incredibly selfish. There's no doubt she's a terrible friend, the only friend that she really has in the book, even though when she's not conscious, she apparently acts in ways which indicate that maybe she isn't so terrible. But I just thought that whole thing was intriguing and interesting. And so I would say I liked My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Do I think it's a great book? No. Do I think it's a really good and interesting book? I definitely did. Anyway, there's my long review of those 4 books which I read here at the end of the month. Really quickly, let me just talk about what I have on my May pile of possibilities. So I have already started reading Cuddy by Benjamin Myers, which is a work of historical fiction about St. Cuthbert. And, it had been nominated for it was on the long list for the Sir Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. I just learned from Katie this morning it didn't make the short list, which is disappointing, but I'm going to read it anyway because Katie says it's one of the best works of historical fiction she's ever read. That's more than good enough for me, and also Bob the Booker really liked it. I'm going to read, Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. It's the second novel by Tommy Orange. I'm going to get a copy of that and read it. Over on Jim's channel, at Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff, he mentioned a book by a Georgian author. Jim lives in Georgia, not the state, but the country. And that book is Hard by a Great Forest by Leo Vardaishvilli. I think that's how you say the last name. And I'm going to get a copy of that and read it because it sounded really intriguing when Jim described it. I'll leave a link to his video down below. And then I'm going to start a project which I'm going to call Reading Bad Hemingway, which I'm going to read the worst Hemingway novels that came out, including posthumous novels, even though it may not include the last posthumous novel. But I'm starting with To Have and Have Not, and just kind of serendipitously, the Rambling Raconteur had asked me, about what I thought was the worst Hemingway novel, and I told him To Have and Have Not, and so he and I are going to kind of buddy read this. But this Reading Bad Hemingway thing could be a reading project that maybe you want to participate in. So if you do want to participate in the Reading Bad Hemingway, and you're a part of Voxer, I'll set up a Voxer group if there's enough interest, and I'll announce every month which Hemingway novel we're going to read, which bad Hemingway novel we're going to read, and then we'll go through them, and however many people want to participate can. If it's just me and Jack this month, that's great. If it's just me every other month, that's great. I really wanted to read these bad Hemingway novels again, so that's what I'm going to do, and so I'm launching the Reading Bad Hemingway project today. Anyway, there you go. There's my video for the end of April, beginning of May. Let me know what you think about the books, my reviews, Reading Bad Hemingway, or any of the books I mentioned in this video. I look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.